Hello,
You got it.
everyone, and welcome back to the Alethea Project. It is my great honor to get to introduce all of you to the amazing leadership team at Make a Stand for Autism. This nonprofit was founded by Jennifer Phillips and her amazing daughter, Kate. And now, together with other autism parents, they are working to unlock the potential in autism through advocacy, research, and education. This amazing team is working to ensure that every child with autism is given the opportunity to reach their fullest potential and to achieve the fundamental right of communication. Joining us today, we've got, of course, our founder, Jennifer, along with Matthew, who is Make a Stand for Autism's policy advisor, Leigh, Nicole, and Mike, who are all parent advocates. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Yeah.
having us.
I
Thank
am
you.
going to kick us off with a hopefully fairly easy question. What inspired you to start Make a Stand for Autism?
What really inspired Make a Stand for Autism was the desire to advocate for families that are just like mine, who are frustrated with how agonizingly slow research advancements and solutions are translating into our everyday lives. What we really want to do is we want to create a network and then also a hub of turnkey actions that people within the autism community can use to advocate on behalf of their kids and who can share with their families who also want to advocate on behalf of their kids. And just kind of do all of the legwork that it takes to define those meaningful steps of actions that we can take for a community that's already stretched very thin.
Absolutely. And so you're talking a lot about like advocacy specifically. I would love to hear from anyone who is interested in sharing when you talk about like gaps in advocacy, what does that mean to you? Like what have been issues that you found most forefront as you're kind of going through this process of raising awareness?
Um, this isn't necessarily a gap, but I would say one of the hurdles in advancing really anything that has to do with autism is the vast heterogeneity of the condition, which has created a lot of people speaking on behalf of other people and stepping on other people's toes. It's just created a lot of infighting. It makes it more challenging to make the advancements that we want to see. And so I think that that has really been a barrier to getting some of the things done that we want to get done. From Make a Stand point of view and from my personal point of view, I would say that the gaps that really have the most urgency and the most needs behind them are addressing the needs of those who are profoundly affected. We call it profound autism. And so these are kids who need around the clock care, most likely for the rest of their lives, and they're minimally to nonverbal. Those who have suffered a neurodevelopmental regression, which I think really needs to be treated like a medical emergency instead of shuffling the kids to behavioral therapy only. Developing a new medical standard of care, developing biologically anchored biomarkers for diagnosis, and then consequently using those biologically anchored biomarkers to create subtypes of autism for more precise medicine for these kids moving forward.
Okay, that's so interesting. Biological markers. That is a word that I don't think a whole lot of people are familiar with. Can you explain kind of what that means and why it's important to focus on?
So these kids with autism, what they show is that they have abnormalities immunologically, they have abnormal metabolism, epilepsy, gastrointestinal issues, And so, and there are many different ways that you can biologically sort of get to a diagnosis. There are some proven causes of autism. So let me just start with that. So, inborn errors of metabolism result in autism, epilepsy can result in autism, valproate exposure can result in autism. They just recently developed a biomarker test for maternal autoantibody autism, biomarkers for that, and like congenital rubella can cause autism. So, I mean, just with those alone, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. These are conditions that can be addressed, and we know that because we know that person's biological subtype based on what they have, and when they're treated, it eliminates their autism symptoms. So there are a huge number of kids on the autism spectrum that show other similar abnormalities that we need to parse out and begin treating more precisely.
Okay, so it kinda sounds like what you're describing is almost like a biology of autism, so to speak,
Absolutely.
symptoms that are pointing towards not just a blanket umbrella diagnosis, but actually, like, specific causations, which is so interesting.
Well,
I saw a
but
few other folks nodding, so I don't know if anybody else kinda wants to jump in and share perspective there.
Yeah, there's no or there's insufficient standard of care after a diagnosis. You just don't the doctors aren't well trained. It's basically read this. When my son was diagnosed 20 years ago, it was read this book and go to this ABA clinic. And at the time, there was a waiting list, and I'd already read the book. So I had nowhere to go. And I don't think it's changed all that much since then.
Would you say that's a common experience for a lot of families once they receive the diagnosis, that it's just a, "Good luck to you. Here's ABA."
I'll hop in here real quick if you don't mind. You know, I think with regards to gaps, one of the largest gaps is that initial diagnosis and then understanding exactly what to do next. Seems very simple and obvious, but the reality is, as many of us, including my family, when we have an 8-year-old boy who was diagnosed with autistic, regressive autism, was hitting all his milestones, and then um, lost his voice. I also work in group health insurance, and we build large employer group plans. So I felt like we had a competitive advantage in understanding that market and understanding how to navigate that. And so if anyone could do that well, it would have been my family, it would have been us. And those landmines are invisible for families, especially if they don't have that kind of visibility, both in terms of cost, but also in terms of emotional anguish. I also think a lot of folks, in terms of gaps, if we're talking gaps here, I think a lot of families go through a sense of denial at first, anger, kind of the normal processes of grieving we all go through. And then once you get to that level of acceptance and you really start to ask the questions, and there's many of families out there who have kiddos on the spectrum, I'm sure we all know, that maybe just don't even want to go get the diagnosis. They're just afraid to do it or they're in denial. And so part of, I think, the journey for me, and I think for probably a lot of people on the panel here is how can we help prop up and support those? So the gaps are there's many gaps, and they're in various elements of the experience, starting from prenatal, two people coming together to create a baby, all the way through to a 20-plus-year-old kiddo that you're trying to take care of that as an adult. And the gaps are endless, unfortunately. But I do think that there's a lot of hope with organizations like Make a Stand for Autism and the like, who have come together to say, how can we unify, bridge the gaps, and create some sense of structure in what is otherwise an extremely difficult circumstance to navigate. We've got really, really bright people on the panel today, and we represent an enormous group of millions of Americans who are impacted by this. And so for me personally, I find it incredibly frustrating that there isn't a more concerted effort to be unified around an issue like this. For my son, profound autism, as Jennifer mentioned, I think should be an emergency if it's regressive. I actually think it should be an emergency in general, but also especially if it's regressive, because there's something acute that appears to be happening. I'm no medical doctor, but I'm a business owner. I work in group health insurance, and I'm a dad warrior.
Just on the tail end of what you said right there, and it's something I say a lot, and I can't even take credit for it because I wasn't the one to say it, but, for many, many years, autism regression has been explained away as
Yes.
autism progression. And that is really to the detriment of a lot of kids and a lot of their potential. And their regression is not something that can be denied. Like you said, I mean, there's a clear night and day difference. And I think it's medically neglectful to treat it as anything less than a medical emergency. And I think the fact that it has just become normalized to recommend behavioral therapy for that is, it blows my mind, really.
And can
Yeah.
I jump in too?
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
So basically, when you think about the fact that we have, what is it, 1 in 30 kids who now have autism, if this were some other kind of diagnosis, whether it's cancer or kidney failure or something else, they would immediately send you to a specialist after you have that kind of diagnosis. Well, we don't really have that. So it is far past time for this to happen and for families to be able to go to a medical professional who is trained to be able to help you with the biomed and help you with those medical biomarkers that Jennifer was talking about, that Mike is talking about, because those are the things that are really helping get to the root cause of what happened to these kids with their regressions. And the fact that Nicole and I both have kids in their 20s, and, here Mike is, and he's got a younger child, an 8-year-old, and there's been almost virtually no progress made on that
Right.
front. It's terrifyingly sad, but I do feel like things are trending in the right direction. So I say that because it's infuriating and it's unacceptable. And that's why so many parents are kind of putting our heads together and trying to fix this. But I also feel like we're seeing some progress at the national level as well, too.
Which is amazing. And we are long overdue for that. It's very frustrating, heartbreaking, not even frustrating. It's very heartbreaking for me to think that my daughter, that y'all's sons were 10 years old when this happened, 12, because if she wasn't until she was 2, so when this happened with my daughter, and that had somebody listened to you and amplified your voice and done something about it, I might have known,
Yeah.
when my daughter was that age. So
I think beyond medically, we've reached the precipice, if not gone over the cliff, of this becoming
I would agree.
So you have this 25% of that population that's going to need round the clock lifetime care.
Right.
So you got to figure out housing, you got to figure out vocational training, you got to figure out what they're going to do to sustain themselves when their parents are gone.
Right.
So I don't know.
Everybody's problem.
Right. It's
Yes,
everybody's problem.
everybody's
and
problem,
It's a
yes.
lifelong challenge. It's, as a parent, and I have 9-year-old kids, I got to fight the school district. I had to fight insurance companies to get
Yes.
coverage. I got to fight, when they get closer to 22, I got to figure out what they're going to do when all the school services stop. And then you got to figure out housing. And the policy field has to catch up with it. And I see a lot of back and forth, and we're arguing about, I look at it of almost cutting off our nose to spite our face, like who's autistic enough and who's, like, varying levels, and we're fighting about, silly stuff when there's so many policy areas that we could work together. And don't let perfect be the enemy of good. We need to start coming up with good policy solutions for long term of what do we do with kids with profound, autism that aren't succeeding in public school. Parents shouldn't have to spend thousands of dollars retaining lawyers and specialists to prove that their kids aren't getting the education that there is appropriate, and having to sue school districts. You know, if your kid had cancer, you wouldn't take them to the pediatrician and say, hey, treat the cancer. You'd go to a child oncologist. So why are we doing that with public school? You know, let's put them with specialists. And that's all along the way in life. All parents on this journey have to fight those challenges daily. And the policy argument is not catching up. And the thing that kind of caught my ear and how Jennifer and I met actually was, you know, finally when the administration mentioned autism. It's the first time in my life
Right.
that I
Yes.
ever heard anybody at the top level of government mention autism. And I'm like, great, we're gonna take this serious. Because right now, prior to this moment in history, I see a lot of people that are, you know, throwing programs and ideas out there, but we're not making the progress fast enough. And progress has to be faster than the rate of diagnosis. And right now, we're not nowhere near as fast as, you know, if in 1990 we went from 1 in 500 and now we're at 1 in 31. Well, we got to be creating policy faster. The last time we talked about how we create housing for special needs kids was 1972. Well, that's not going to work, you know. So that's my frustration with this, and what brings me to this group is we have to get out there and start talking policy wise, because we have to make our voice heard, and there's enough of us now that we can be, as parents, that we can be effective and literally not let these policymakers get away with ignoring the issue.
What I see is parents, the parents are the ones trying to solve the issues, like the Medical Academy of Pediatrics for Special Needs. Dan Rosignol started that, was a parent of 2 children with autism. 29 Acres, which is a local place housing development for special needs, parents started that. We Built, parents started that. Daymark, assisted living, parents started that. Hank's Friends, National Autism Association of North Texas, Awesome Moms, the list goes on. And these are support programs, housing, medical. It's the parents that are doing it, and it's been grassroots, but it's not at a policy level, like you're saying, Matthew.
Well, and I think that Matthew has touched on a few times too, that it's not only a matter of implementing new policies, but perhaps removing some red tape from old policies. That I am not as familiar with the housing issue, but removing red tape from former policies that are or could hinder efforts for housing. Is that right, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's time to look at it. I mean, you know, what are we doing with special needs kids? I have a colleague that I used to work with. His son has Down syndrome. He started an independent living facility. They could only house 12 kids because
Yes.
once you went over 12, you needed to have a full-time nurse on staff. So it's those policies, and it's not just state policy. Then you get into federal policy. So we have to start streamlining it and making it easier for these facilities to come up, because you're going to have you think you have a housing crisis now, you're going to have a housing crisis for special needs people in about 10 to 15 years.
The tsunami's coming. I would even say it might be before that.
Matthew and I feel equally passionate about 2 different things, which is great because we bring both of those things to Make a Stand for Autism, where Matthew is very passionate and concerned about the housing issue. I'm kind of like, at some point we have to stop pulling people out of the river and go upstream and find out why are they falling in the river, right, to begin with. So kind of coming at it from both sides.
Jennifer, I think you touched on a good point. I'm glad, Matthew, you're bringing this up. But The reality from my lens, and I think many of you would agree, is there's what do we do to prevent this from continuing? And then what do we do for those who've been impacted? And the
Yep.
strategies, the plans, the resources, the education, and everything you have to wrap around those things, they're going to be very different. And there'll be synergies, but those synergies are going to have to come together after you address those independently as you start to identify those synergies. And that's an enormous lift because, to your point, right, Matthew, there's a huge regulatory legislative obstacle. Jennifer obviously mentioned that as well. And then you've just got the everyday parent issue. Who do I call? Is my doctor educated in this? How do they get educated in this? Do they care? Is this trusted professional the one I need to talk to? If not them, then who? Are they the right, specialist? Is there a unified place to go see a specialist? And those are things that seem maybe normal for us as panelists now to have answers for, or at least to some extent. But for most, and I would fair to say, and this is a total guesstimate, 90+% of parents out there aren't even familiar with the term biomed,
Yep.
let alone half the stuff we're even talking about. And so, agreed, Nicole, the tsunami is definitely coming. And I think it's coming on several different shores. And I think it's our responsibility, outside of just all the effort and energy and love we put into our own families, to educate our peers, our friends, our strangers that are impacted by the same thing, because we have an obligation. This is an issue that transcends all the obstacles that get in the way of the outcome that I think is best for everyone. And it's about kids and families and health.
I think it's, when you look at this policy and medically, it's what we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to not only do the science and look at other ways of looking at autism and the biology part of it and the biomedicine and the biomarkers and have some ability to do that, but also look at, okay, we have this population of kids that's out there in adults. What are we doing to help them? And that's kind of what, drew me to this group is the ability to do both.
I think news for a lot of people, because it's not often that we get the opportunity, people who, like me, who may be kind of on the outside looking into the autism world, to really hear the ins and outs of what exactly you guys have to go through just to establish a basic standard of care for your kids. And I think that's something that a lot of people underestimate because they think, oh, it's autism. How bad can it be? And they don't realize that you're having to fight the school districts, you're having to fight the doctors, you're having to fight the ABA therapists, and you have to prove to the insurance companies, and you have to advocate, in churches and in social groups. And it's at all fronts constantly. And it's interesting to me because it seems like it would be a very public battle, but it's one that we don't hear about very often. And we don't really get to see. And I would be curious as to if you have any perspective as to why that is. How is it that autism has become such a hugely profound issue, and yet it's still not represented well, and it's not talked about as broadly as I think it should be?
Here's the reality. So it depends on what you're looking at, right? Because I like, for me, I'll speak for myself. I don't think that there's one smoking gun. I don't think that there's one, let's say, cause or risk factor. I think it is a series of misalignment, a series of unfortunate decisions, sometimes just simply circumstantial, as Jennifer talked about, other causes for autism. And so for me, I became the Sherlock Holmes and dad warrior that my son, just without him realizing it, had now employed me to do. So now I'm having, to research and learn about immune health and mitochondrial health and metabolic health and detox pathways and, the gut. And when you start to find out that there's, unless this has changed just recently, that there's only 2 approved drugs to treat autism, and they're both antipsychotics, and your child is not psychotic, particularly when you also have evidence that they used to talk and sing and dance and then don't, you have to, it's just human nature to go, well, then why? But because I also have that group health insurance background, I see some of the financial incentives. I see the way the system is broken. If you give any good or bad actors incentive to turn left or right, and you give them enough of that incentive, they will turn left or they will turn right just based on that. And there's white papers that will support that transcend this particular topic. It's just human behavior. So I think in several years from now, we'll look back and realize that we just didn't have the incentives lined up properly with all the stakeholders. And many families, millions of families, will have been impacted by it. And there needs to be a solution for those that already are and those that are yet to come or potentially could be. And when those parents hit that wall, because that's what's going to happen to any parent listening to this right now, or that's just recently gone through this or has gone through this years ago, you go through the traditional steps to address cause and effect, symptoms, how to treat those. And when you run up against the large majority, find out those treatments are not efficient, then you start to ask different questions. And then there's also, and by the way, those different questions lead you to aha moments. And those aha moments, for us, one of the first aha moments was biomed. And it wasn't the cure all end all. It was, oh my gosh, I didn't know there was a door number 2. And you start to explore that, and then you start to share that. But at the end of the day, I think that families just want to know not necessarily what seems so obvious, like how do I help my child and make them better? They also want to know, how did this happen? How do we prevent it from happening? And what can I do going forward?
Mhm.
Right? So for me, and I think for many of us on the panel here, it's about awareness. It's about having hard conversations and having the courage to step up. And even if you're not sure you're 100% right, just ask the question.
But also, one of the things I thought of when you mentioned that, it's like you can't, for a while, maybe you could it not impact you, but how many people, when you go to the grocery store, the airport, any tourist place, don't you see those kids everywhere?
All the time.
Don't you see them? And pretty much, I would say most people have been impacted somehow. If it's not in their family, it might be their neighbor. So it's because there's, it's increased so much, we can't ignore it anymore.
Well, I think it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable for people who don't experience it to look at. And I think that's a reality. And they would rather, I think people would rather ignore reality in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into this, but one of the things that this made me think of is there's quite a divide between parents of the profoundly autistic and the new kind of, not new, but what used to be Asperger's and now is more neurodivergent. And there's some pushback for saying that we want to change our kids. And it's difficult because I feel like if our kids don't have a voice, if they cannot communicate with, other neurodivergent people who say, there's nothing wrong with me, why are you trying to change me? And that feels offensive to them. And there needs to be a balance in there. And I think that is one of the gaps that we didn't quite cover. But what you said, it just made me, because I think many of the neurodivergent people think, well, can't you just accept them how they are?
Well, I would say that there's a huge pushback on the medical model of autism just in general, more broadly speaking. And I don't really understand that, I think, to like the fullest extent. But I think that faction of the community has a lot to do with that. And so maybe a lot of parents are stretched thin. A lot of parents are shamed for speaking out, I think that slows down our efforts.
Basically, what I'm hearing all of you say, and it's super interesting, is that parents are exhausted, right? They have kind of reached a point where even advocacy feels like another step that's just too much. Looking into biomed feels like another step that's just too much. They have figured out how to survive, and they're 5, 10, 15 years into this, and they have figured out how to maintain survival, and that is where they feel they have to stay. And so their voices, what little energy they have to kind of express what they're going through and what their experiences are being smothered by I hate to say louder end of the spectrum because that sounds derogatory. I don't intend it to be that way, but the louder end of the spectrum who has lower support needs, who is able to speak on their own, who is able to self advocate, and they're saying, we don't want a cure. And that is what society is kind of buying into because it's more comfortable. It's easier for people to think of autism as something cutesy and neurodiverse rather than a serious issue that I feel needs to be cared about by everyone, right?
What I have to say is quick. I would take it one step further from smothered. I would say oppressed.
Mm.
Because I
And
think
why?
that it is they are aware, of the struggles. We are vocalizing the struggles. They are choosing to talk over us, to talk for us. So I would say it's oppression.
I think we've watered down the diagnosis. It's like level stage 4 cancer in stage 1 cancer. Like, and I know they're different, medically, but there's no way that people that can advocate for themselves and take care of themselves and are just a little bit socially quirky, are the same as kids like my children who have self-interest behavior and aggression and toileting issues and all the things that nobody wants to discuss and shouldn't be mentioned in polite society, but it's our reality. And you want to pretend like we're the same. We're not.
Right.
You're not the same as my kids.
Right.
Well, and
Because
the
I'm not.
irony is that everything that we want to do for our kids is to try and give them the kind of life that these people who are oppressing us have. I mean, that's the irony of all of it. I think that something that is important is that, and maybe this is because this is the terminology that we use in research, but I think people think that we need our kids to be social, right? Like their personality is not meeting our standards. And I don't think that word social really represents what it is that we are looking for in our kids as parents. What we are looking for is something that cannot be measured in research. We're looking for a connection with our kids because that is what was taken from us.
Yep.
Was that connection. And so I think that people see that word, and especially people in like the neurodiversity crowd, and they think that our kids are just not meeting the expectations of what we had dreamt that they would be, or they're not going to be who we are. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I love anything that's quirky about my daughter. I mean, I hope all of that stays. She's like a little Wednesday Addams, but what we don't have is connection. Words matter, right? And using the right words to describe what it is, what we need and what we want is really important.
It is. And when my son was diagnosed in 2006, he actually had a regression. It was after his 4-year vaccines. And fortunately, I was able to connect with other parents and find really good doctors who really kind of opened that biomed door for us. But when he was diagnosed, because he didn't lose language, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And the biggest help I got was from other autism parents in the beginning who had already done the work and had already, found the right specialist. And so I actually had such a great benefit of learning through those other parents and being able to see some really good specialists and do a lot of recovery for my son. So I'm very fortunate, very thankful, very blessed. My son is 23. He's studying to be an aerospace engineer. So I'm so grateful, right? I still have a very close connection with my son. We didn't lose that. But I think one of the things that makes me so passionate about this organization and other organizations is that this is a very simple right. Children need to be connected with their parents. They need to have the ability to communicate. Some of the things that we're seeing about suppression of the way that some nonverbal teenagers and young adults are trying to communicate is being stifled and downplayed. And so when I have so many friends who have such severely affected, profoundly affected children and young adults who are having seizures every day, who have that self-injurious behavior, it seems criminal to me. So this is the perfect time to use momentum and start advocating for the changes that need to happen. So exactly like we said before, so that we can stop it from happening to future kids and address the children and the teens and the young adults and the families who are already suffering from effects of what happened, and the breakdown of society not being able to address it properly.
I am so happy that your son is able to go and get a aerospace engineering degree. And I think of it from the other side, where it's like people are telling me to shut up about my kids. Like, I want my kid to not like be able to go outside in the yard and not worry that he's going to run into traffic.
Yes.
And like they're like, "Oh no, shut up. Don't talk about your profoundly autistic child." Like,
It's criminal. It's infuriating, Matthew. I don't understand how other people can act that way. Were there two children with autism who drowned this week
yeah.
because they eloped from their places of care and they died. And so this is an emergency and it needs to be addressed properly. And like you said, Matthew, without condemnation, without telling you as their parents to be quiet. No, you cannot be quiet. You have to stand up for their safety, for their health, and for their rights.
What does that say that they think about us, that they think that we would manufacture something like that for attention or I mean, what is it in them that makes them think that we would make something like would hush us, you know? That is a mentality that I just don't understand.
I think we can respect the neurodivergence. They do have, this is a generalization, so it's not, doesn't apply to everybody, but the masking, that is exhausting. We understand that. But what we're looking at for as parents is for that group to not criticize, suppress our voices, because our children don't have their own voices, so we are their voices.
And they don't get to be, we can learn from them.
Right.
They don't get to be our children's voices just because they are affected by a similar condition on the total opposite end of the spectrum. You know,
I have noticed too, and I'll be interested if you guys had kind of picked up on this some, but when it comes to a lot of the advocates now that are super loud and trying to fight against quote unquote like cures for autism, it seems like there's a little bit of a miscommunication in that you all aren't wanting to cure the autism. What you're wanting to cure is the disconnect, the inability to build relationships, the self-harm behavior, the trapped in their own bodies, essentially. It's the side effects of this particular diagnosis that you're fighting for medical professionals to look at you and say, yeah, there's something that is wrong here, and we can help your child achieve better quality of life. Not that autism is necessarily a disease that needs to be cured, but what's happening in the profoundly autistic population, it's significant, it's scary, it's a big deal.
okay, I want to
And maybe
respond.
that's where people get hung up. I'm curious, what do y'all think about that?
I have a lot to say about that. I want to
Yeah.
respond to that. So even in your the way that you articulated that question, you were so nervous to say cure autism, you know? I mean, everybody walks on eggshells about this. So let me just lay it out from my personal perspective. My daughter was born totally healthy, perfect APGAR scores, and for 2 years, she developed completely normally, meaning like all the important things happened. Like we were connected, she was communicating. We were able to go to library time, gymboree, like all of these things, right? My daughter got sick at 23 months old with a common childhood illness. And within 2 to 3 weeks, she was totally gone. Okay. This was accompanied by all of the comorbid conditions that we see, I would say, overrepresented in autism. So her lack of communication, her repetitiveness, her ruminating on one thing, all of these medical comorbidities, all of this is by definition her autism. So if that is what autism is, then I want to cure it.
When you learn as a parent, when you start to uncover the aha doors and you're opening these things up, you realize it could be PANS panda, it could be autoimmune encephalitis, it could be gut dysbiosis, it could be SIBO, it could be dyspraxia, it could be chronic constipation, it could be all these things, and ASD is the blanket. And so if I think of my own son, for example, and this took me, even though I'm on a 15-month journey opening up a new door, I'm realizing now through very objective tests at the local children's hospital, right, where the best and brightest doctors live, that my son is, not just autistic, that's the macro kind of diagnosis, but he's got immune overreactivity, oxidative stress sensitivity, overhistamine reactions, massive inflammation, and a huge reliance on metabolic and antioxidant reserves. What does that mean to a guy that went to business school or a dad that just loves his kid? It doesn't mean a lot until you learn it. And if I were to have that conversation with my traditional doctor, which again, I'm not ripping traditional medicine, I work in that space. There is a place for it. Then I start to ask myself, like Matthew, how can I stop my son from eloping on a street? Why does he need one-to-one care every day? And why has he not passed his own stool on his own for 2 years without an enema from mom and dad? Why can't I hear him say I love you for the first time, or daddy? Or why can't I go take him into the t-ball like he's so dysregulated, right? So that pain drives the tailwind for me personally, and a lot of parents like me, like you guys on the call. And there is a, no pun intended here, spectrum of parents that are impacted differently than others.
Let me come at it from a parent whose kids didn't hit those milestones and there wasn't regression, and is, you know, I guess when I look at cures, and this is kind of the thing, it's, to me, it's such a sensitive thing. Like, what I'm looking at is, how do I minimize the impact? Right? Like, is there something that would help my children live somewhat normal lives where they're not reliant on another adult for the rest of their lives to manage their affairs, all their affairs?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure as a parent how to prepare them for that. And I'm never going to, I mean, there's two guarantees in life, death and taxes. So I'm eventually going to die. Right? So who takes care of my kids, after they're gone? Who, financially, medically, who's going to make sure they're brushing their teeth and, all those things. So if there is something that can alleviate those things and help them gain functional independence, and whether it's a medical treatment or something like that, yeah, I want to cure that, because nobody should have their children sentenced to death of not being able to live independently.
It's 100%. Or
Yep.
or to not be able to communicate, right?
Yep.
And I think that we really need to stop and think about how and why we have been put on the defense as autism parents, because we shouldn't be. We should be able to actively, on the offense, right? Here's my sports thing. We should be able to actively seek help, answers, cures for our kid. we're not forcing cures upon anybody else. Although, you know, on I feel like people in the neurodiversity crowd kind of talk out of both sides of their mouth, right? Because they want to like be who they are and they want to celebrate that. And I think that that's wonderful. Like, I will be right alongside celebrating with you. But then in the next breath, it's like they talk about like the masking and the struggles that they face and all. And it's like, well, do you want the help or not? Because listen, there's only one way to find out if there's a cure for autism, if there are biologically anchored biomarkers for autism, what the underlying biology is, what its connection is to the behavioral and completely 100% clinical diagnosis of autism. And the only way out is through. So we have two people both saying they struggle, but only one is willing to do the research to find out what the biology is and can it help. And the other team is actively pushing against that. Why is that? You know, because if they're so sure that it's their personality that they were born with, then they should have nothing to worry about. Then that should just prove their point, right? Am I making sense?
I'd like to say some, Jennifer. I think that if somebody, a parent or a person, is happy with the way things are, then I love and support that.
100%.
But that doesn't mean that I am. These are big, broad stroke comments. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions to all of this, but I think in general, you're 100% right. Like, you have to be able to meet people where they're at to better understand where your place is in that community. And if you can't do that, you can't help. And that's the reality, is we're faced with people who are maybe attempting to try to relate and attempting to try to normalize something that could be very difficult for you and or all of us, at the expense of finding real truths that could move the needle in a way that transcends just being socially accepted. And it's very frustrating. And I know people listening to this are going to feel the same way.
Well, maybe they don't have a lot of hope that the answers will be found. So they're scared. I mean, if I have to think about it from their perspective, it makes them uneasy to think that through the rest of their lives, people could be looking for cures for something that they think might stigmatize how far they have gotten so far that they're going to be stigmatized in the workplace or whatever, because it will go against them. And so they're willing to forgo all of the research so that they can live out the rest of their lives in this space that they have found for themselves without the stigma. And there's just nothing we can do about that. I mean, I hate that. I hate that for them, but I have to find answers for my daughter.
That's why I think it's so important that people kind of start tuning into voices like yours. It's because, as far as we know, autism is one of the very, very few disabilities that is only diagnosed through behavior. That is all clinicians look at. That is all clinicians have ever looked at. For the past 50 years, the diagnostic criteria is behavior. So, with that in mind, technically the umbrella of autism can go over anybody who wants to claim it. And that is partially what we're seeing coming from the advocacy community, right? Is they're saying there's nothing wrong with me. This is who I am. This is giving me my identity because I feel like these behaviors mesh with my personality. Therefore, you should celebrate me. It's not a disability, which is fine if they feel confident enough to say that. But it really is unfair, the fact that we have let it go so far as to we have people who are self-diagnosing and claiming the autism and advocating for autism when they don't even have an official diagnosis because it gives them a sense of validation. And we extend grace to those people. We understand where they're coming from, but at the end of the day, this is why it's important for lay people to learn how to listen to parents. And I like to try and kind of give people practical applications, right? Like takeaways. You listen to this conversation, you have all this information. Okay, now what are people going to do with this? So if you all were to, sit in front of a room of people who were outside the autism world, if you were to sit in front of, a group of doctors, if you were to give practical steps for people, okay, here is how you can make a difference as we're trying to move policies forward, as we're trying to get our voices heard. What would you say and how would you kind of break that down?
Ask better questions.
How
The
so?
a
Yeah.
smart person, you can tell a smart person by their answers and a wise one by their questions.
Mhm.
And we have been taking orders for decades about our health. And
Mhm.
rightfully so. By and large, we're not the experts. We're citizens doing other things. We're not medical providers. But when the answers we get back from the simple questions we have post diagnosis or even pre diagnosis, those needs aren't being met, it takes courage for parents and people, particularly in the face of resistance, to stand up and ask better questions, because that requires basically a face off with somebody who is absolutely on paper and for all intents and purposes more educated than you are in the medical space. But I'm not going to argue with any woman on this panel if she's got her mom gut going. If she's got a mommy gut going on her kiddo, like, I'm not going to be the one to argue with her. Chances are she's going to be more right than 90% of the doctors out there. So that to me is a really great question. It's a really sensitive issue. I think that the parents need to listen to their medical providers, but ask better questions. And if you're not getting the answers that you need, find another medical provider. It's no different than an attorney or a consultant. If you're not getting your needs met, ask a different type of provider. And that, to me, isn't the answer to your question, but it's a really good starting point.
If it was a group of parents, I would say connect with other parents in the same situation, because I would say the majority, probably more than 90% of what I've learned is from other parents. And that includes like biomed. And the only thing, Mike, I'm thinking is if you just go to your regular doctor, you can ask questions, but you don't know what you don't know. So for doctors, because the only thing that there might be more, but the only thing I know of is the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs. And I would say be trained, go there and be trained to learn about the comorbidities, to learn about the immune system, either underperforming, it's under or over, mitochondrial dysfunction, cerebral folate deficiency, all of the things that your traditional your pediatrician is not talking about. But talk to parents, get involved in support groups. The parents are going to be the most helpful. And that includes medical, and that includes education.
Yeah, I agree. 100%
everything.
agree.
And I would say yes, and we need to be amplifying the organizations and the groups like MAPS that are actually doing the hard work and really digging in and helping families. And so I would say we are at a very critical point with our administration. We talked about it earlier. We talked about how things have changed drastically, especially with RFK Jr. at the head of HHS. We're seeing tremendous changes in the IACC with so many amazing voices that are going to really change the course of the future for our families and the children that are affected. And just so much that's happening within HHS, which is really a lot of what we've been talking about tonight, that the changes that we need to see. So I think we need to amplify the things that are going in the right direction and support those people, support those organizations, and make sure that the rest of society is clued in to what's happening, because these are changes that some of us have been working for and praying for and hitting walls for me almost 2 decades. I've been an advocate in this space. I was blogging a long time ago for the Dallas Morning News, and then for Autism Spot, and then all these different things. And so I feel like so many of us have been kind of hitting our head against the wall without seeing any changes, and we are at a very critical and exciting time where we are seeing some changes. So we need to amplify that.
From your perspective as leaders in Make a Stand for Autism, you are trying to unify these parents and you are trying to build off this, I feel, positive momentum. And I'm glad that, that seems to be across the board. People are excited about the changes that are happening. What would you like to share with our listeners kind of about your mission? Now, Make Stand for Autism is a great example of an organization that is really trying to head something meaningful. How can people get involved and kind of what does that look like practically in terms of supporting organizations like yours?
Think, journey of 1,000 to 10,000 steps starts with that first step, right? So get in contact, go to the website, add your name to the list,
Yep.
join with other parents, host a fundraiser, do something. We have to talk about this and we have to talk about solutions. There is no longer the ability in society to whistle past this graveyard. We have to start to make concrete steps to unite and have some, we can have discussions that are uncomfortable in within the family. But we have to externally, and especially in the public policy arena, start to look at solutions
Yep.
that drive both not only the medical community to say, hey, let's do some more research, and make those tests available to parents and stuff like that, but also look at policy solutions like, hey, instead of the school district being able to say, hey, your kid's making adequate progress and you have to prove us wrong, let's flip that script on that, and now the school district has to prove to the state that they're making adequate progress for the kid. So now that relationship's inverse. So I think there's a lot of small things that would have a huge impact. And by parents uniting, it gives you it makes your voice more powerful, and that's the first step. I think the small thing is enter your email, join a group, join together with other parents, and make your voices louder.
I would agree with all of that. I think just in terms of make a stand, go to the website, sign up for our updates. We're creating turnkey action steps for you guys to uh, be able to just jump on and advocate for your kids and for your families. And just I think just speak up. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't let someone shame you into not speaking up because our voices need to be heard. I mean, we are the voices for our kids. And so don't accept anything less than that. Don't let somebody put you on the defense. Get out there and, shamelessly just say, this is my experience and this is what we want to do about it. I would say. And then for parents, I would echo for advice for parents. I want to touch on that a little bit because I would echo everything that all of you said about that. And I would just add like one simple thing, which is presume competence.
Yes.
I
100%.
always presume competence in your kids.
I have a nonverbal son, as mentioned. He's 8, as I mentioned, and I got a fantastic tip from somebody a couple years ago, and they said, and this is, by the way, this is on the back of ACA type devices. In this case, it's the speller's board, which my son had the practitioner today at the house, and he's a young speller for the precedent. Normally it's a little bit older, the spellers. I know there's some young ones, but for 8 years old, he's kind of younger in that way. And I had no idea his favorite color was red. I didn't know he wanted to be a doctor. I didn't know what he liked at all until we started doing something like that. And the reason I'm saying that is because they told me to presume competence. And the tip that they gave me that I'll tell everybody listening to this who has nonverbal kids, and I know that's not everybody, but it's a big enough population for me to say that. If they're 8, talk to them like they're 10. If they're 5, talk to them like they're 7. If they're 3, talk to them like they're 5. Why? Sounds kind of crazy at first, because everybody else is talking to the 5-year-old like they're 2.
Right.
And it was the best advice that we got, because I realized that I was showing up and meeting my kiddo where he was at, but I didn't realize that's not where he was at because I didn't presume competence. So thank you for bringing that up, Jennifer, because to me, that's incredible. And by and large, the one thing that I worry about more than anything else on the planet, other than the tactics and strategies right now in front of me that can help to move the needle to make my son better, healthier, and happier, is what Matthew brought up. It's the thing that tugs at my heart harder than anything, and that's what happens when we're gone. And that's something that if you have any kiddo with special needs, that is the driving, probably one of your biggest rocks that you have to deal with. So what an incredible group of panelists today. And I'm grateful to be a part of the conversation.
And thank you all for sharing your perspectives. I think you've made some really awesome points, and honestly, like, you've driven the point home that it is an issue that everybody needs to be invested in, and whether that's, time, talent, or treasure, maybe you don't have the time to invest volunteer hours, but you've got the money and can afford to donate to an organization of parents who are fighting for a better quality of life for their kids. I mean, do it. If you've got the ability to master the art of presuming competence, do it. Like, it doesn't have to be world changing for you to just take that step and get involved. So I would just encourage our audience not to take this and listen to it and be entertained by it, but to actually kind of take it and really ask yourself, okay, what are you going to do with this information? What's a small action step that you can take to continue to raise awareness for the situation, to ultimately continue to support these kids? Because they're incredible. The world needs to hear their voices, and they need to be given the opportunity to speak. So thank you all for sharing your stories and your perspectives. And unless anyone has any closing thoughts, I think we did it.
I would just say, Chloe, you're incredible.
Oh,
Yes.
We
thank
can
you.
all agree on that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
Chloe.
you so much, Chloe. Yes.
Thank
Yes,
all
thank
of
you.
you.